And welcome to In Touch on Choice TV, the best way to start your week with us on a Monday, where we will be discussing matters related to governance, politics, social commentary, and others. Tonight we have in studio a very special guest. I'm very honored that he is with me tonight. In fact, his presence tonight has reminded me of another program that I hosted on Choice some time ago, and that was in the Red Zone. It is no different tonight, a new program, a new name, but from the content of tonight's program, of course, I am sure many of our listeners and our viewers would be very much interested in the discussion, in the debate, and of course, later on, we will be taking your calls live on In Touch. Without any further ado, I want to welcome our President of the Senate, talk show host, former Press Secretary to the Prime Minister, Honorable Claudius J. Francis, with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me as your guest, JD. I'm honored to be your second guest on this brand new show. I watched the premiere program in its entirety, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. You see, I wasted no time with the introductions because there is just so much to discuss when you are on with us. But I want to start by dealing with the softer side of things before we go into the heart of all of the discussion. As I indicated to our listeners early on, tonight we'll be discussing a wide range of issues. We'll be discussing political matters that have been circulating in the news for the last 2 weeks or so. We'll also be discussing some matters related to government. But I want to start by asking you a very interesting question. And this question I asked because of my own position right now, and a lot of the comments that are now being made in the media, social and otherwise, by journalists and by individuals who have been involved in the media for some time. And so I want to ask you about the environment. You have been doing this for a very long time. I would take the chance and say before I was born. How do you assess the current environment? There are suggestions that there is an attack on freedom of speech, that journalists and media practitioners and so on cannot do their jobs the way they could have done it before because there are barriers and you know, that kind of suggestion. What is your own thought? You've been there back then, you are here now. How do you assess the situation? Is it better now? Was it better back then? What are some of the threats that you see to quote-unquote freedom of speech and freedom of expression in the media?
Well, clearly those persons who make those comments have convenient amnesia or they choose to forget. St. Lucia has the distinction of being only one of perhaps 4 countries in the entire English-speaking Caribbean where calypsonians have been sued for songs that they have written. Radio Caribbean was almost shut down by a Minister of Information and Broadcasting because Max Stephen Orberton, better known as Lord Help Me, wrote a calypso called The Wedding List. Other radio stations, there was prior to the Labour Party's election in 1997, Radio St. Lucia had a policy of not inviting Rick Wayne, Claudius Francis on Radio St. Lucia. The only way we got on, we paid for a program. That's how we got on. There was a government press secretary, not a prime minister's press secretary, Joe Cox, who threatened the press almost on an hourly basis. So when people want to suggest today that freedom of expression is under attack, that's ludicrous. In fact, the Labour Party was actually accused by Rick, for example, in 1998 of being in bed with the media, of being too close to the media. In fact, his exact words were that the media and the government ought to have an antagonistic relationship. When the Prime Minister was hosting monthly press lunches at the Prime Minister's official residence at VG, he was told that he was trying to buy the press. When the Prime Minister announced that they were going to give grants to journalists, he was being told that he was buying the press. When we got into office in 1997, there were probably about one or two talk shows favorable to the government. By 1998, the landscape had exploded. Who closed Radio Kilabui? Kenny Anthony? So this government has not shut down one radio station, has not shut down one newspaper, has not shut down one television station. In fact, there are more licenses granted under this government than ever previously. What has happened is you have individuals who are in the government who are prepared to challenge lazy journalism, ineffective journalism, one-sided journalism, and to give their side of the story. And that is what people are considering, well, not people, a very, very small minority is considering as being an attack on the press. It is not an attack on the press. It is a defense of your own persona and of your government.
Sometimes, most times, I get the sense that the responsibility seems to be one-sided in that some individuals, particularly if they have the power of the media, they have the controls, they feel it is okay to say whatever they think, whatever they feel about politicians, and politicians do not have the same right to express their own sentiments towards them or towards how they practice their work. And so most times if you have politicians or ministers and so on commenting not necessarily on the personalities but on the information that is presented or the way in which certain media practitioners would conduct themselves and go about practicing their work, then they take offense to that and they see it as an attack on the media in general. But you served as press secretary to the Prime Minister from 1997 thereabout, and so you would have had an opportunity to work very closely with the media as well. I am sure that it was not always a happy hand-in-glove kind of relationship, but how would you rate what you see happening now? Do you think it is more difficult now, given the fact that you've spoken about, the proliferation of several radio and television stations, now you have the social media? Your take? Now is the best time to be press secretary, or back then was the best time to be press secretary?
Much more difficult today. I suspect I would have run afoul of many people if we had the social media landscape that we have today. I mean, when I became press secretary, the internet was a brand new thing. It just started. People were just talking about email. People were just, texting was not even there yet, because what we had was, you didn't have, well, first of all, it wasn't even mobile phones. They were so huge, you had to carry them in vehicles.
I can't imagine carrying out my role now in that kind of
No, it's certainly more difficult now. Your every word is analyzed much more closely. So you have a far more difficult task than I ever had. So I admire you for that. But in terms of how it went, I thought the media and I had a decent enough relationship. I made a point of having weekly press conferences. And funnily, the media began getting upset at those press conferences because one of them said they were getting too much information. There was nothing to scandalize about the government. I would say, for example, whatever cabinet minutes would have been agreed upon conclusions, once they were ratified the following week and there was nothing of national security interest, or that I would come and brief the press about it the following week, or bring a particular minister with me to brief. So we had a good relationship, I must say, yes.
One thing I must say, particularly for the benefit of our viewers, I really must say that I've benefited a lot from your own experience. Always a person I know that I can call if I need clarification on a matter, or if I need guidance on a particular matter. So this is why sometimes it is good, as one of our Facebook friends said, for the experience to meet the youth. And I
thought the youth was me and the experience you.
Try harder, Claudius. But to get on the serious side, last week was a very testy week for a lot of persons in St. Lucia, a week where we had...
But before you go into that, without cutting you short, JD, while we were on the press secretary thing, I did see a comment by the president of the Media Association where he made reference to your position as being akin to that of a diplomat.
Oh, yes.
I've never heard journalism as badly expressed as that. The press secretary is the most political post you can get. In fact, so political is the post of press secretary that the Public Service Commission has no jurisdiction to deny the Prime Minister his right of person. The Public Service Commission gets involved with the appointment of the press secretary only so that the press secretary may receive payment from the public purse. And when people talk about victimization, we won the election on Friday, the 23rd of May, 1997. The first appointment that Kenny Anthony made was that of press secretary on Monday, the 26th of May. Oh. So I went to work before the cabinet was sworn in. I didn't get paid for almost a year because we inherited a public service commission that just delayed my appointment. They couldn't stop it, so just delayed it.
Wow.
For a year. We'll talk about diplomacy. But you speak for the Prime Minister.
And so it is the Prime Minister who directs
Absolutely.
the work program of the press secretary.
Absolutely. So it is ludicrous to suggest that the press secretary is anything other than a political person.
Believe me, I've heard the comments and I've gotten to the point where I just dismiss them because it clearly shows that whoever is speaking does not have an understanding of the post and what it would entail. Claudius, because I want to ensure that we get as much time as possible to go into the discussion. And the first issue that I want to discuss tonight is that of the St. Lucia Fire Service. There was a strike it lasted for about 11 days. And during that period, there was an address, a statement on the situation by the Prime Minister. We also had the Minister for National Security involved in discussions with the Fire Service Association, the management of the fire service. Later on, we also had the intervention of the acting Prime Minister at the time, Honorable Philip J. Pierre. And 11 days where there were reports from members of the public that they were denied essential and critical services that are provided by the Fire Service Association. On Friday, there was a meeting between Minister for Public Service, Minister for Home Affairs, the acting Prime Minister, and the Fire Service Association, and there was an agreement. The Fire Service Association called off the strike. Its members went back to work on Friday. Many persons have been asking, what now? And many persons have been asking, well, what about all of what was said for the last 4 weeks? And I know that when people ask that question, they refer to you because you have been in the front line exposing a lot of the inconsistencies in the message that was being put forward by the Fire Service Association, explaining some of the issues that they were challenging, and also sharing with the public the steps that have been taken thus far to address the concerns that have been brought forward. To your credit, you have never denied that there are issues in the Fire Service Association, but you have always put forward the position that both sides need to accept responsibility for where we are right now. What are your own views, first, on the strike itself? Do you think it was warranted, that the action that was taken, the environment necessitated that kind of action?
I don't think it was warranted. And in fact, the Fire Service Association consistently shifted the goalposts. The primary reason, and the records are there, that they stated as going on strike was that the government had not implemented the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry. That was the prima facie reason. When it was brought out to the public that in fact the only recommendation regarding personnel that was made by the Commission of Inquiry related to the transfer of Fire Officer Downs from Viewfort to Castries, which was done, and the placing on contract of the fire chief, a 2-year contract. How that would have assisted, I don't know. But let's backtrack a little. Last week you had the Minister for National Security and Legal Affairs, and he made a statement. I think you asked him about whether the fire service was an essential service.
Yes.
And his response was to the effect that it's a little gray area, and he has been somewhat criticized for that because people are saying blanketly that the fire service is not an essential service. Schedule 1 to the Essential Services Act details the 6 areas which form essential services. It does not say the hospitals. It does not say the health centers. It says a hospital service. Now, there was a time when that law was passed, the ambulance service was limited to the hospital. Subsequently, there came attached to the fire service an EMS, emergency medical services, and the ambulances are largely with the fire services now.
Yes.
There was a recent case in England where the courts ruled that the ambulance service, even though operated by the fire service, was an essential service because the hospital, a hospital service, is an essential service. And that's what the minister meant by a gray area. A hospital by itself, the fire service by itself, is clearly not covered under Schedule 1. But the ambulance service attached to it makes a difference. Because ambulance service is nothing if not a hospital service or a public health service, both of which are essential services.
So in the case like St. Lucia, where the fire service, the FSA, and certain members of the public do not consider it because it is not expressly stated in the law, how then would a determination be made as to how the unions and how the employees and so on would treat that service that they provide?
A recent case in England the courts ruled that the ambulance service of the fire service was an essential service.
But would you agree, in order to remove, any doubt that there perhaps should have been an amendment to the legislation when you had that shift from the hospital to the fire service to ensure that it is expressly stated and to avoid, the confusion that there seem to be now? Because it seems to me that what we are arguing is an interpretation.
Absolutely, which is why it has to be made clearer, and it should be stated unambiguously whether or not it falls. But that is the gray area that he spoke of. But going back to the substance of your question.
Yes.
To listen to the Fire Service Association is to believe that 100% of the blame lay with the fire chief and the management of the fire service. The Fire Service Association was an equal blame partner in all of the problems that have ensued. The Fire Service Association has been most economical in giving information about what transpired in the Commission of Inquiry. I happen to have followed the Commission of Inquiry, and I'm possibly one of the few people with the access not to the recommendations, but to the actual evidence. So, for example, in responding to questions from the commissioner, Shane Felix admitted that a lot of the problems in the fire service between 2010 and 2012 were of a personal nature to him as it related to his transfer. And he objected to his transfer, among other grounds, that the letterhead, and we talk about pettiness, the letterhead which contained this transfer was headed St. Lucia Fire and Emergency Services. And it was Shane Felix's view that because the fire service is legislated as the fire service, that the words emergency service on the letterhead made his transfer illegal. It took him 2 years at the Commission of Inquiry when he admitted that while he was sitting at the Commission of Inquiry, his lawyer told him that it was not illegal and could not nullify his transfer. The question is, why for 2 years didn't Mr. Felix seek the advice of his own counsel and that of the Fire Service Association? You get the impression that Shane Felix and Leslie Fontenelle have always been at loggerheads. Well, guess what? Prior to the assumption of Leslie Fontenelle as fire chief, the Fire Service Association had no home. It was Leslie Fontenelle who approached the fire service president and offered them an office.
The same office that was
same
the
office,
center
yeah.
of debate
Absolutely.
and confusion.
You get the impression, even from the president of the TUF, that Shane Felix and the association were kicked out of the new office. Not so. A letter was written in April advising Mr. Felix that the fire chief wanted to reorganize the EMS and that the EMS would be occupying that office, and therefore they wished to shift office to another office, not putting them out to another office. Shane Felix never even acknowledged that letter. Another letter was written in May, reminding him of the first letter. Again, no acknowledgement. A senior officer was detailed to speak with Mr. Felix, who refused to speak with him. It was at that point that the fire chief locked the office. I mean, that was insubordination of the highest order. And every time I use Shane Felix, I want you to understand I'm using it as the face of the Fire Service Association, not him personally. Okay? The commissioner asked Shane Felix whether he was aware of Staff Order 10.1 and did he have it with him. He said no, he didn't have it with him, but he knows what it said. He was asked, did you breach that? He says, well, you have to understand I was under stress. They asked him, did you breach that? Well, you have to, so just answer yes or no. Finally, he answered, yes, he breached that. They then put it to him, if you became fire chief tomorrow, what would be your position if a subordinate refused to obey an order like you disobeyed an order, as he just let that pass? So when you go to the evidence before the tribunal, and you know, he says things, for example, like the evidence was so overwhelming that the fire chief had no case, and the fire chief withdrew the case against him and the radio stations.
I've heard that
and went on to say that such a bad case that the fire chief had to pay them costs. That's nonsense. Francis Alexis, the commissioner, breached his terms of reference and called the fire chief and Shane Felix aside and attempted to broach an agreement between the two of them.
To be a mediator.
A mediator. That was not his role, but he did that. And he said, in effect, if the fire chief were to withdraw his suit, would he be able to work with him? And Shane said, yeah, you can work with the fire chief. The fire chief did that. Now, here's what happens. If somebody files a lawsuit against you, you go and you secure an attorney to defend yourself. You have incurred costs. Whether or not that person had the strongest case in the world, if he comes up and withdraws that case, he has to pay you costs. That is settled law. Because you have engaged lawyers and you have incurred costs. He can't just come and tell you, okay, well, I'm forgiving you. Forgive me? I always thought you didn't have a case, so I took a lawyer. It is settled law. You must pay my fees that I have. So the payment of the fees by Leslie Fontenelle was no admission that he didn't have a case. And I'm not saying he had a case. I'm saying there was no admission. Then there was the other matter of the sexual charge.
Yes.
I was present. On the advice of his lawyer, Leslie Fontenelle, recognizing the limited jurisdiction of the tribunal, said he was in effect taking the fifth and he would remain silent and not say anything that may possibly be used against him in a criminal case. The courts, the high courts, the Court of Appeal of the OECS, the Privy Council have all ruled that the right to silence must not and cannot be interpreted by any court, by any tribunal, in a manner that is detrimental or negative to the person. It is a constitutional right to remain silent, and that right cannot be used against you negatively. If a negative inference, you say, well, because he didn't answer, we have to assume he had something to hide. The highest court of the land, the Privy Council, has ruled that such a right to silence cannot be used against you. And that's all Leslie Fontenelle did. And I'm not here speaking about whether or not there is a case to be heard. I'm saying that he chose a constitutional right to silence, and the courts have ruled that that right cannot be treated in a negative way.
I must ask you a question. Despite all of what you have presented, there are some who are of the view that in the name of peace, the fact that the Chief Fire Officer has been seconded to SLASPA and the Fire Service Association has agreed to call off the strike and its members go back to work, that in the name of peace, the government should let it be and adhere to the demands or the requests of the Fire Service Association, that any attempt to deal with some of the breaches that you highlighted and the conduct of the Fire Service Association will cause the situation to escalate, and that the firemen they have the power to pull back the labor, which would in turn cause the country to suffer. So to avoid any disturbances, the government should go the way of casting a blind eye, for want of a better term, to all of the issues that you have highlighted. What would be your own take on that?
Well, let's just say that the Labour Party came into office on the premise that there was corruption in the last government, and for the sake of good governance, we ought just to let that pass too. As I said, in my view, there are cases to be answered on both sides. This is a discipline force. You can't have people breaching rules, regulations, deciding which ones to follow, which ones not to follow. I don't know that. I certainly don't subscribe to any witch hunt. There ought not to be any witch hunt. But disciplinary action has to be taken where breaches of discipline, where breaches of staff orders, where breaches of management have occurred on both sides of the aisle, whether on management or at the level of the fire officers. What precedent are you going to be setting if you say every time you have a grievance, let's just move? For example, personally, I have a fundamental difficulty with anyone going on strike and getting paid for that period. I have a fundamental and philosophical difficulty with that. I don't oppose the government if the government decides not to go that way. I'm speaking for myself. Think about it. Just about maybe 100 fire officers were involved in the strike. Mm-hmm. There are about 390 fire officers overall. It meant 290 were doing the job of 390. You're now telling the 290 who remain, and God bless their hearts, that not only are they not being rewarded, but that those for whom they worked are going to get the same remuneration as they did. I think that's a slap in the face of those who stayed on. What you're telling me, in effect, is anytime there's a strike, I have no business staying on the job.
Very strong sentiments. We are due for our first commercial break. You are viewing In Touch. We'll be right back with our discussion. After, we'll continue our discussion. We will be going into other matters when we come back. But please stay with us. Let someone know the program is on, and you can stay in touch with President of the Senate, Claudius Francis, by logging on to www.choice39.tv. And we'll be right back after that break. Welcome back to In Touch again. We're streaming live on www.choice39.tv. I apologize that I did not broadcast that link earlier, but I know that I'm getting a lot of messages because we were broadcasting live last week on RSL. This was only for the first program, and so let your friends know that the program is online at www.choice39.tv. My guest this evening, Honorable Claudius Francis, President of the Senate, talk show host, and we have been discussing issues in the news. We just spoke about the fire service, the strike, and he expressed some very strong sentiments as to where we are right now and what the government's approach should be to dealing with that situation. Just before we open up our phone lines, the people are very anxious to get in on the action. I've been getting messages and so on. But there is a matter that I would love to get your take on, and that is the United Workers' Party, and I say United Workers' Party, although the discussion started out as parliamentarians being denied access to the St. Jude Hospital construction site, but I'd like to say it was the United Workers' Party that was denied access to the construction site because no prior arrangements were made to visit that site on that given day. A lot has been made about it in the news. In fact, I've heard the political leader say that he has given instructions that it be raised in the House of Assembly. He sees it as disrespectful to the parliamentarians, and he feels that they should be given an opportunity to walk in and to be able to see for themselves how the government's money is being spent. And he said particularly because we just went to the House of Assembly to borrow money to complete the project. What is your take on how this played out last week? Do you think that there is a justified case from the United Workers' Party?
Absolutely not. First of all, this is not a government site at the moment. This is a construction site where the contractor has the overall responsibility. That is why on that site, there's public liability insurance, there's contractor's insurance, because things can happen. When members, parliamentarians wanted to see what was happening at the dam, we didn't just say that we are parliamentarians. I didn't just say the Prime Minister is involved, so let's take the Prime Minister. The presiding officers, Peter Forster and myself, engaged the managing director, and Jimmy Fletcher, Senator Jimmy Fletcher, is the minister for Wasco. He couldn't just decide he was going up there as a parliamentarian. It was through the office of the Speaker of the House and the office of the President of the Senate that we engaged the managing director of Wasco, Mr. Vincent Hippolyte. We asked whether it would be possible for members of Parliament to have an on-site visit so we could see firsthand what it is that we are asking people to pay additional monies for, what it is that we are borrowing money, what it is that the Prime Minister has decided as Minister for Finance to write off debts for. We want to see what's going on. There was communication back and forth until a date where everybody was available. The Speaker, he didn't write to parliamentarians. The Speaker wrote to members of the House of Assembly. I wrote to members of the Senate advising them that the trip was on, transportation was available. One or two members decided to drive in their own vehicles, but in convoy. We went there. We were taken on a site visit. That's how it's done. No member of Parliament, no member of Cabinet can simply get up and say, because it is a taxpayers funded event, you can just go there. You're funding it, but the primary responsibility at this point in time is the contractors. There are protocols to be observed when you are visited. You can't say, for example, because Alvina Reynolds is the Minister for Health, they are visiting hours. Alvina Reynolds can say, I have a relative there, I'm going anytime I want. No, there are protocols. There may well be a dispensation given to her to visit outwith of those hours, but she must ask first, she must make the arrangement. And so I want to go on record as applauding the contractor for denying access to anybody who does not have a prior engagement.
But I must tell you, in all of the discussion and the debate that has been ongoing, they have failed to highlight that they visited the actual hospital. They visited the stadium. They were welcome. They were engaged by management and other officials. But the issue was at the construction site. And for all of the reasons that you have highlighted, I certainly agree with you. I will tell you, Prime Minister visits the site from time to time, but there is always prior notice. There is always some kind of conversation with the contractor to let him know that the Prime Minister will be coming on whatever date and so on.
In my other life, JD, I'm an insurance loss adjuster. So there was an accident at the St. Jude site, as you know.
Yes.
I was going to investigate it. I couldn't just go down there. I called the contractor. We made the necessary arrangements as to what date, what time I could arrive. I got there, steel toe, hard hat,
yes,
safety vest. That's how you visit a construction site. No, you don't just walk in there. It's unheard of.
One
Absolutely.
more thing I must ask you, and again, the United Workers' Party is in the news, so of course I would like to get your own take on some of the new developments. Dr. Claudius Prevail has indicated that he intends to contest the next general elections. Further today, he issued a statement or did an interview for Media House indicating that he intends also to fill what he has described as a void in the leadership of the United Workers' Party. What are your views on him? Well, certainly I know it is not surprising to many persons that he has this interest because it has showed on every single public appearance that he has had for many, many, many years. But what is your take? Do you see him filling that void? We all know there is a huge gap right now, but what is your own take on his announcement and also his intention to seek leadership in the UWP?
Well, let's first of all debunk the myth that Claudius Prevail, Dr. Prevail, is a new face. In fact, I recall Constitution Park in April of 1997. Radio St. Lucia's Constitution Park program was actually held on Constitution Park. And the guests on that day were Claudius Prevail and Claudius Francis. So Claudius Prevail is not a new face in the United Workers' Party. So we're talking 1997. Claudius Prevail has been a strategist for the United Workers' Party for as long as Claudius Prevail has existed. So I don't know that he's bringing anything new. If you were the advisor, then you would have to make a public statement or at least acknowledge publicly that your advice was not being heeded. Because if your advice was being heeded and your party is where it is, you're certainly not going to make a difference doing for yourself what others have been doing for you. So if it is that he's simply coming as a quote-unquote new face, then nothing's going to change. I kind of suspected Dr. Prevail would have entered the fray not only as a candidate, but as an aspirant to the political leadership at the town hall meeting. Because whatever else you may think of Claudius Prevail, you cannot think of Claudius Prevail as a fool. And when he made a certain statement that people who have failed in politics ought not to be embraced and brought back, I saw Ernest Hilaire's his eyes light up, because it was an opening for Ernest to bring back, without prompting, Rochamel, to bring back $50 million tourism spending, to bring back Heppel, to bring back Boxing in Paradise, to bring back telephone bills, all of which were directed at one person, the leader of the United Workers' Party. So I actually called Ernest after the show and said, Ernest, I do not think Dr. Prevail's statement was accidental. And so I'm not surprised that today he is. But from where I stand, if he's going to fill a void, then the void is in the entire party. It's not just at the leadership level. So he needs more than just himself challenging Mr. Chastney. He needs an entire slate of candidates to get in.
Well, let's see what happens on the other side. Of course, something to always monitor on that end. Tomorrow we go to the House of Assembly, and today a statement was issued from the Office of the Prime Minister indicating that the Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, will be seeking the authorization of Parliament to guarantee loans that were accessed by the United Workers' Party government for a number of infrastructural projects. The Ajay-Derisa Road, one of the most expensive roads ever constructed in St. Lucia. There's the Allen Bosque Highway, the East Coast Road, and the Bocas Sunbuilt Road as well. How is it possible that we can be at this stage now? This is a question that many persons are asking. And in fact, you have been involved in the debate online in SLAP where many persons are saying, but how is that possible and why is this coming to the fore right now? Tomorrow we will go to the House, and I know that the Senate too will get an opportunity to add their voice to the debate. But what are your own sentiments ahead of the House meeting tomorrow? Of course, the former minister is there and would have to give an explanation to the House, I hope. But what do you expect?
Well, to quote Yogi Bear, I think it was, deja vu all over again. When we got into office in 1997, exactly that happened. 1 year later, Kenny Anthony was to guarantee a loan for the new CDC buildings that were built under Sir John with money from the National Insurance Corporation, and it meant that people's pensions were in jeopardy because the monies that had been used to build the new CDCs had not been guaranteed by Parliament. So you weren't even talking about banks. You were talking about people's deposits at the National Insurance Scheme as it then was. So it's not the first time that Kenny Anthony has had to come to guarantee loans that were not guaranteed by the United Workers' Party. So I'm not surprised. It's a sad thing, though, because the jeopardy that the people of St. Lucia, because people say government.
Yes.
It is not government. It's the taxpayers that's going to foot whatever default there is. So it's not just the people in the House of Assembly. It is really the taxpayers. And so why did it take 3 years, as people are asking? The business of governance is not easy. Things come to the fore only when certain payments have to be made and you realize, wait a minute, but we are making payments on something that's not guaranteed. We are in breach of the law. So kudos to the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance for bringing this matter as expeditiously as he is once he got wind of it.
Is there any recourse? Any action that can be taken?
Well, the Finance Act, as it then was constituted, does not really have a recourse as such. And by now remedying the deficiencies that were there, the first thing the courts may ask you is what it is that you're charging with. Did we suffer any problems? Because it reminds me of 1 year when there was a breach of the Constitution in that Sir John did not bring a budget on time, and Tom Walcott filed a lawsuit in the High Court. By the time it was heard, Sir John had in fact presented a budget, and Justice Susie Duvine, the late Susie Duvine, was left in a quandary. There was no remedy to give to Tom Walcott because the relief he was seeking had already been done. So no, there's really no remedy except to ensure that good governance is followed.
Speaking of budget, just before we go to a break, there's a question I must ask you about our current budget, because I have heard statements being made by the president of the CSC that the current budget is illegal because there are certain figures that are stipulated in the budget as it relates to wages and salaries and so on, and the salaries remain at the current level, and our expenditure, as it is put, is not in line with what is expressed in the budget. How does it work? Is that a true reflection of what it is, or will we get to the point where perhaps some adjustments can be made or would have to be made to ensure that you're able to cover your full expenditure?
Well, were it not for the fact that there are people out there who actually believe what Mary Isaac says, I would treat the question with the same disrespect that it deserves. But because people may want to believe that, the fact of the matter is there is nothing illegal about the budget. There is nothing unconstitutional about the budget. The budget is proper, and if at any time the wages that are being paid, the wages and salaries that are being paid, are going to exceed what is in the current budget, then the Prime Minister will at the appropriate time come to the House to supplement that budget. We are a long way from there.
As it stands now, because we have adjustments to wages and salaries, but there are also adjustments to other forms of expenditure, as was done in the year before, because if you're trying to contain your expenditure, then of course you would see where you can give and take. But we do not always expend exactly what is in the budget,
Exactly.
not so?
Exactly. So there's nothing illegal about the budget, and I'm surprised that somebody of the stature of experience of Mrs. Isaac would make such a statement.
Well, there have been a lot of statements of like manner, and I'm sure you're aware of it too because
Absolutely.
you're very much involved in the media. We'll go to a commercial break right now. When we come back, the phone number will be on the screen and we'll be welcoming your calls so you could add your voice to the discussion. Stay in touch. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Touch. Our telephone lines are open, so you can begin to call in to add your voice to the discussion. 452-7347 is the number to dial. My guest tonight is Senator Honorable Claudius Francis, President of the Senate, talk show host, and a number of other titles. We have our first caller on the line. Good night, caller. You're on the air.
Good night, Jadia, and how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Good night, Brother Francis.
Good night.
I must say I am very much impressed with your dress code, you know.
I was.
Yeah, I'll take a page from your book. However, I call tonight to give honor. And I'm the kind of person I believe in giving honor where honor is due, irrespective of, you know. I want to give honor to two ministers of government. The first person I want to honor tonight is Honorable Philip J. Pierre. I believe that he exercised humility. He was very tactful. He was very skillful, and he was able to get these firemen to go back to work. He was able to bring all that emotion under control, and I want to say bravo to Philip J. Pierre. And the other minister of government I want to bravo is Honorable Dalso. My Bible tells me he that humble himself, that's Matthew 23, verse 12, JJ. I know you love the Bible also, you could check it out. My Bible says, he that humble himself, he shall be exalted.
Yep.
But he who exalts himself shall be abased. And I said this to say that I was at lunch with a friend of mine. And one of our discussion that to me, I was telling him that I never heard I can recall when I heard a politician say that he's sorry. And it really touched my heart when I heard the Honorable Dalso calling the media and saying that he is sorry if he offended the family of the deceased in Soufrière. And I want to bravo Harold Dalso. You see, and that, in my opinion, it should be used as a yardstick, an example for not only politicians but for pastors, for people in position that when they go off course to say that they are sorry. And I want to take time to bravo Harold Dalso and Philip J. Pierre. That's my contribution tonight.
Thank you so much. We continue to take your phone calls at 452-7347. You can call in with any contribution that you want to make on some of the matters we have discussed here tonight. Good night, you're on the air.
Hi, good night, Judy. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Also, good night to Claudius.
Hi, good night.
I just wanted to ask Claudius whether he thinks those workers who do not strike, if there is, say, an increase that is negotiated, whether they should benefit from it as well. That's in response to a comment he made referring to the striking officers.
Thank you so much for that question.
Absolutely, because you get paid for the work that you do, and they are going to be doing the same work as anybody else. Absolutely, they should benefit. But the point of the matter is, I'm not opposed to striking. My problem is, let's not forget, in the last 7 years, the fire service, people tend to forget, as if the fire service has just been going on strike under Kenny Anthony. When Keith Mondesi was National Security Minister in 2007, the fire service went on strike, to the point where doctors were almost being investigated for the number of sick leave papers that they were given. Under this administration, there have been at least almost 3 strikes. The fire service has gone on more sick-outs and more strikes than anybody else. Is it that their problems are greater, or is it that there are personality conflicts that require to be solved and not bring the country in dispute? That's my point. People have legitimate reasons to go on strike. I believe the reasons given by the fire service, as they kept changing it as things were addressed, that is my problem with that.
We've lost our call.
So I don't, the point they were making about, well, you go on strike for better wages and people ought not to benefit. You don't benefit because you don't get an increase because you go on strike. You get an increase because of the quality and quantity of work you do.
452-7347 is the number to dial. Good night, you on the air.
Good night.
Hello.
Good night, JD. Good night, Claudius.
Hi, good night.
The Prime Minister is crying. The economy is bad. Tighten your belt, tighten your belt. Asking the civil servant to take 5% cut. And tomorrow you go in Parliament and borrow all that money. And you crying economy bad. And you asking people to do sacrifice.
Caller, do you understand that we are going to the House to seek authorization to guarantee monies that was borrowed by the United Workers' Party?
Well,
and that is what some people do not understand. We're talking about over $61 million that was borrowed by the UWP. The money has already been borrowed, and we are already paying back some of that.
We are now fulfilling the obligations of the Finance Act and statute.
Exactly. Good night, caller. You on the air?
Good evening, JD.
Hi, how are you?
I'm guest, Claudius.
Hi, good night.
Yes, my contribution is as follows. I have been following the show and some of the comments that you've been making. And I'm of the opinion that while you are correct in saying that the opinions of the fire service...
Oh, sorry. You can try to call again at 452-7347. Of course, I'd love to hear your contribution and your thoughts. You seem to have been commenting on something you said.
Yeah.
Good night, you on the air?
Hey. Hi, good night.
Hello.
Good night.
I am Francis and Claudia. Claudia, I would like a question to you.
Sure, go ahead.
And also, Francis, I had a question too. First, I will deal with you first, Claudia. I wanted to know, well, who you have in your closet. Did you have a man in your closet and you don't know?
What kind of ridiculous question is that?
I know you will say that.
Yeah, but that's a stupid question as far as I'm concerned.
No, don't call it stupid. Just listen.
Well, perhaps you should have asked your question instead of making such a ridiculous comment.
No, Claudia, if you take your time,
Who's
you
Claudia?
will know.
She's
Who's Claudia?
Okay. The reason why I asked you that, because I could listen to the radio and everything, and I hear you have Victoria's Secret wearing.
But you should not even give, you see, honestly, statements like that, disrespectful statements and comments like that, you should not even carry it beyond where it is being said.
But I just wanted to know that if you don't have, if you cannot have that person to have respect for your closet.
No, I don't pay attention. You see, I know exactly where this is coming from, and I don't pay attention to it. And I think I would advise you to do the same.
Okay. And also, Claudius. Okay, thank you to you. And Claudius.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate the way you handle your program and so forth like that. Because sometimes you hear people that's making certain statements, and I just wonder why they getting this kind of statement. And I listen to your program, and then you just break it down for the public to let the public know exactly what's going on sometimes. And I really applaud you for this kind of...
Thank you very much, sir.
...way you just use your program.
Thank you.
Without no insult, and you always have a smiling way to the public. So, what I will say to the public now tonight, I will just tell the public there's a way for everything, and there's an end for everything. When people come in and bashful one party, and you're waiting on the other side, and you're watching on the other side, you're in the worst thing from the other side. So what I'm saying to the public now, running there and out, that is not making any sense. It is just watch what a party doing for the interest of the people, not interest of the people pocket. And to me, I find Labour Party doing for the short time, Labour Party doing a great job, right? But I would not give Kenyan Tony too much of credit of that for it to do what he is supposed to do. But you see pressure from other side, from my government,
I like it sometimes because the more pressure government gets, is the more way it tie this belt better than for it to don't push it on in the how you call it, in the cookie jar too much, right? So I will tell them all those that has pushed their hand in the cookie jar and now they're making big noise, they're making all kind of fuss, especially Shasney. So I will tell the public, watch the bird before they watch the Liberty Bird. So bye.
Thank you so much for your contribution, caller. Good night, you're on the air.
Hi, good evening, JD.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Now, I'd just like to see, in the interest of bringing the country together, and I would think that your show is one that is to really highlight the issues at hand and to really try to explain to St. Lucians what is going on. Let me just say, one, the InTouch is a good idea, but we must understand that St. Lucia is still a divided nation. I do not subject to InTouch and red all over the place and stars, and I believe if we're doing something and we are doing it in the interest of the country, we should use more national colors and this sort of thing.
National colors like
the flag of St. Lucia.
Yellow and blue?
Yeah, not yellow and blue, but, well, that's part of it. White and black and all these other colors, you know, and the red, I believe, is just a turn-off. It's as if, you know, it reminded me of the show you had before elections. And it's really, I have been flipping, I want to hear what you're saying, but the colors are just really, it's not upsetting me. I can look at your show because I looked at the first one when you had the minister, and it was interesting. I listened to every single thing. Okay. But right now you find me really flipping channels. I'm going back to you, listening to what Mr.
So if the set was blue, you would have your undivided attention.
Yeah, something if it was more national colors or more.
So if the colors were blue,
yes,
it would be better. So
yes,
you pay more attention to the colors as opposed to the content of the show.
I'm listening to the content. I'm paying attention to the content, but I just believe as a government in power, too much attention is being made on partism, you know, symbols and partism, colors and these things. To me, that's not the time for that. The time right now is to really bring St. Lucians together. You to me, instead of InTouch in red and thing, you put the flag of St. Lucia. We have national symbols. We have different things that could have been used in that thing.
Well, you know, it's amazing, caller, that the only time unity is talked about on radio and television is when the Labour Party is in office. You never hear about government of national unity under the United Workers' Party. You never hear about
because the thing is that the United Workers' Party too, the good thing about them is that even when they have when they're in government and they have their programs, they actually use the flag
with more yellow than anything else. But well, again, that's your opinion. I respect it. Yeah, I respect it.
I respect. Sure. You see, but this idea that parties debating their policies divide people is ridiculous. If people want to be divided, they will be divided.
Exactly.
The fact of the matter is, we are all St. Lucians. First and foremost, we have a particular philosophy in the Labour Party. The United Workers' Party has a philosophy. We disagree fundamentally with their philosophy, and we push our philosophy. It is not because we believe it is best for the Labour Party. We believe our philosophy is best for the country. If somebody can show us otherwise, then that's why people elect one government over another. It is the pushing of the agenda. You don't expect the United Workers' Party to ever come on and say the last 5 years of the SLP have been the best years in St. Lucia.
Or sometimes what I find is that people expect once you get into office that the party should die, that all activities related to the party should cease
because you got into office on the basis of the philosophies of the party.
Exactly, and so while
I
respect what the caller says,
is try to bring in the philosophy to the point where people are discriminated against. That's a different thing.
Exactly.
That you are now the government of everybody.
Exactly.
But Philip J.P.I. is still a district representative for Castries East.
Yes.
Kenny Anthony is still a district representative
and the deputy political leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party.
So you can't get away from that. That's
Agreed.
the reality.
Agreed. We'll take a final call. Good night, you on the air.
Yeah, good evening.
Hello.
Hi, good night.
Yeah, good evening.
Good night.
JD and Claudius.
Hello.
Yes, I just want to tell you that I really love the colors. At least I'm seeing the colors. But when I listen to other talk shows, they are tinted with color. And I don't hear that same, I don't hear people say, let's bring the country together. And on that note, it is interesting to know that the same way that ladies spoke about colors and unity, sometimes I read blogs, and when I hear the truth is always the truth when it is against this administration. Can you all elaborate?
Conveniently.
Pardon?
I say conveniently, yes. There are some people.
If
yeah.
John Doe comes and says, okay, this is the truth, but John Doe writes what is in favor of the government, everybody questions it. But you have Jane Doe who says, this is the truth. And everybody, oh, this is the truth. Let us hear it. This is the truth. I would just like you all to elaborate on the new truths that are coming out now in St. Lucia. Thank you.
Sure.
You know, Julia, we
Thank
talk
you so
about
much.
colors.
But I expected that, Claudius.
No,
and if you listened last week, you would have heard from the outset. I said, you know what? I know there are some who would say this is a political program and I ought not to be political as press secretary and so on and so forth. And I expected that. For me, I prefer you put yourself out there, your agenda is up front, and you do what you have to do openly and honestly. 90% of the talk show hosts in St. Lucia, they're hiding behind black and white. And at the end of the day, their agenda is skewed one way and one way only. If you're going to do something, you might as well put yourself out there, represent who you intend to represent, and then allow your show to move on from there. I host Inside Government, and that is a program that is dedicated solely to government matters. Technocrats, public servants, you know, heads of organizations. This caller has never called in to say, good job, or I like that this is happening in this ministry and so on. So calls like that, I mean, I respect their opinion, but I disagree. And perhaps we should put on an extra red staff for next week.
Tomorrow, the House of Assembly meets.
Yes.
I'll invite the caller to go into the House of Assembly and look at the color of the water jugs.
Yes, the top is yellow. I've noted that. I was
and
told
we have done nothing about it. We believe they are water jugs.
Yeah, so, and as far as I'm concerned,
they are water jugs.
Yeah, and it's petty to look into matters like that and incur new costs.
Has not suggested anything to the presiding officers, perhaps because he knows. First of all, I don't think he would. But even if he attempted to, he knows the presiding officers would put him exactly where he ought to be with such a suggestion.
But you know what the EWPs would tell you? Yellow is in the flag. And if you were to pay attention to them, you would think that the flag has more yellow than it has blue. But we have time to take a few more calls. Good night, you're on the air. Hello, good night.
Yes, hello, good night.
Hi,
yes,
good
sir.
Night.
Yeah, it wasn't by, I didn't feel like to call the program tonight, but it's a program that's on, and I think it's a very informative program. Claudius, I just want to a set of workers apologize to them. As you know, I have been around the trade union movement from the 70s, 79, 80 there. And a set of workers met me a couple of weeks ago and say, we are not saying anything about them while the trade union movement is bashing them. It pains me, as I said, to see and hear union, a political union, suggesting to the employer, and I use that as the employer, if they want to correct the deficit, they can look at retrenching a set of workers, meaning that saying that retrenching implies removing people who entered the service first. So you're looking at night
removing those who came from entered service last.
Yeah?
Entered last.
Yes, entered last. That they should move out first. Now I say so because I want to raise my hand up. I want to raise my hand up. So when the roll is called, I will give a count. Workers like the STEP and all those workers, they are workers. And I find it very un-union-like for any trade union to suggest to an employer that they should look at a particular group of workers to retrench just to save themselves. We all should be fighting for workers' welfare, decent work agenda. And they are telling me, quickly, okay, they are telling me that we have not said, I have not said nothing because I speak on the labor code, and for other issues, when related to workers' rights and anything that related to workers. So I want to tell them tonight, I have spoken about it. I have written to that particular union about it, showing my dissatisfaction with suggesting that NICE, STEP, and even in the last strike action there, when they were ridiculing STEP, NICE, and all things, I find, as a trade unionist myself, someone who has boys in the union, I was disappointed in that, and I want to tell them that my disappointment was expressed in other forums than on your air, and that I will continue to dismiss this kind of thing because we all are workers, and we should all unions should serve for the betterment of the workers. That's my point.
Let me just add to what the caller is saying. I mean, when you hear Mrs. Isaac speak, for example, she always makes the point that the workers are being asked to take a pay cut, the public servants. Yeah. And the Prime Minister has made it, in the words of the Forbes Burnham, lucidly clear that from the Prime Minister down is going to be having a 5% cut. You look at all of the estimates, you would see the Prime, but you just hear she makes the point continuously that the government is asking workers to sacrifice.
Or one set of
people. Yes. When in fact the only people who are not going to be called upon are the lower grades, I think from between 3 and 1.
Yeah, 1 to 3. Yeah.
But the Prime Minister has made it clear that every government minister, every permanent secretary, everybody, and this from a man who has not received a pay increase from 1998.
Indeed. We will take our final call. Good night, you're on the air.
Hello. Hello, good night.
Good night.
Can I ask you all a couple of financial questions?
Let's see. We don't have much time, but let's see how far we could go.
Well, you all talk as if St. Lucia is short of money, okay? But there are two questions that are bothering the members of the public. Number one, what did Labour do with the money that they got from Taiwan? And number two, what did Labour do with the money that they got from VAT?
Okay. Very interesting questions.
You find?
Very, very interesting questions. I'm surprised because the Taiwanese money is out there.
And the Prime Minister has made it a point of giving every occasion, handing it over to the Accountant General. And every time a new check is given, accounting in the finest and most minute detail for that. The VAT, we talk as if VAT is an additional charge that was brought in there. So there were taxes before, where taxes gave you $4, and all of a sudden VAT has now given you an additional $6. That's not what it was. VAT is something akin to when in 1999 or 2000 it was found out that very few motorists paid license fees. So the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, on the advice of his technocrats, then decided to abolish the license fees for motor vehicles and to place a 25 cents per gallon levy on gasoline, because everybody has to buy gasoline.
Everybody, yes.
That is what VAT has done generally. I've gone on other shows and I've shown where in several instances, not just on medication, that VAT has actually resulted in a reduction in the cost of goods. So it's not that VAT was this huge income earner. VAT was decided upon primarily because it is a fairer and more equitable tax.
Yes, and I must say to the caller as well that,
so
the Prime Minister
caller was certainly not disguised.
He was not in touch. That's what it shows, that he was not in touch and not paying attention, because as you said, on every occasion it is made public. Also, the Prime Minister has given an account of revenue from VAT. We did this in the budget, and also the projections, what we expect to receive this year as well was given, and it will still not take us as close to where we need to go
because
in terms of the revenue.
The basket of exemptions is so huge that, you know,
the largest in the region, even after the adjustments were recently made.
Absolutely.
Claudius, we have expired our time on the program tonight. I always knew that having you here means that there would be a lot to discuss and we would need extra time. I know that my phone is going and we have received a number of messages, areas that we have not touched. However, the management of choice has been extremely generous and we have been able to go above our time to accommodate some of our callers. But this is an indication that you'll be back here soon.
Once you invite me, I'll be here.
Definitely. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for coming to share your perspective on a number of the issues. Particularly, I think the information shared on the St. Lucia Fire Service and what is happening in there would have been enlightening to a lot of our viewers.
As an apart say that Mr. Felix has gone on every talk show except mine, which I publicly invited him on.
I thought he was your friend.
Yes, and he agreed publicly to come on the show and never did.
Well, let's see how it will go in the next few weeks. Of course, I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank our callers too. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for being part of the show. We'll be back here next week, Monday, with another edition of In Touch. I want to thank you again for the suggestions that we have received, the messages and the calls that came through tonight. We are not always able to address all of your issues, but rest assured that each program will be designed to bring you in touch with what is happening in St. Lucia, current affairs, whether it be government, politics, or otherwise. Good night and do enjoy the rest of your week. I'm Jadia Shapia Emmanuel.